that sort of brings it neatly to the CIH and its future. I mean, obviously you've thought a lot about this in discussions over the job and in the last 3 weeks. How do you see the future for the CIH as an organisation?
Well, I would have never taken the job if I didn't think there was a huge opportunity here. And as I said earlier, I just think this is a great time to be involved in housing. I think there are some challenges, which we can talk about, but I think there are some real opportunities as well. I think as an organization, it's an organization that's gone through a lot of change. And some of what I need to do now is to consolidate that change. I need to balance the budget. We need to get some business processes working appropriately. We have a corporate plan that actually sets out some ambitions around membership services. We need to make certain that our qualifications are valued. There are a number of things that we're trying to achieve, and we need to make certain that the organization is able to do that. I think that's really important. The second thing I would say is that I'm very keen, and I noticed it actually was in the introduction, but in my 3 weeks, in my travels to Scotland and today, and I'm going to Northern Ireland next week, I'm very keen. I'm quite impressed by what is going on in the devolved nations, and I want to try to make certain that as an organization, we're really cross-fertilizing and learning across the country. So Coventry in England are doing various things, but there are some wonderful things happening here, and I want us to be able to utilize a lot more of that resource if we can. The third thing is that, and again, I think it's so interesting to me when I see the kinds of relationships that you have here in Wales with government and the sort of influence and the challenge and the way things are developed in some of the devolved nations. I'm not certain it works exactly the same way always in England, and yet we need to make certain that, you know, basically governments are standing up and listening to what we're saying because they value our expert, professional, evidence-based input. I often think about organizations like the Institute of Fiscal Studies, for example, and you notice how often they're quoted in the press recently with a great amount of authority. I think we are often approached asking for a view by the press and others with the same type of authority because we are seen as a professional body that does not represent any particular provider interest. And I just think there's something very powerful about that going forward. So I'm really keen that we try to get that right as well. So in summary, we've got to get the organization into shape. We know what we need to do. We've got to make certain we have great membership services and our learning and our qualification office is relevant and valued. Very keen to see young people coming into the profession, liking the way that we offer those qualifications, you know, really trying to stimulate that kind of interest in housing. And then we need to have an impact and influence.
Okay. And then in terms of CIH members, there was a lot of talk, particularly yesterday, about professionalism. Yeah. A housing professional. What does a housing professional mean when, like yourself, so many people didn't start off in housing but came into it? Do you think we have a clear enough sense of what a career in housing or being a housing professional means?
Well, I think there are different careers you can have in housing, which is quite obvious. I mean, most of us in the room probably have come from different aspects of it. But I think that housing, and it is something about the diversity of the role that housing does actually play in the types of services we offer. So I do think there is something about becoming qualified and expert in those different aspects of housing as you go forward. So I think that the profession has changed a lot in the years, certainly I've been involved. But I think that there is still a lot to be said about being able to demonstrate that you really know your business, or you really know your specialty, or you are a leader, or all of the various other things that we're doing. And I think there is something there about the value of that kind of qualification. Now that means that the way we do things need to make certain that we adjust to the modern age. We need to be seen. I'm often surprised, if you think about even now sometimes when I talk to young people, you know, they are interested in doing some of the jobs that we have in our profession. And it's a question of how do we open that up and make that attractive and offer the career opportunities.
Okay, okay. And then housing in general, obviously within the restrictions of what you can say, what would you see as the sort of main challenges but also opportunities for housing in the next few years?
Well, I think it is going, I mean, I'm not going to say anything anyone doesn't know in the room, it's going to be really challenging. I look at the fiscal environment that we are going to be operating in, and that itself is going to pose some challenges to us. I mean, if you look at, who knows what will happen in the election, but if you look at the Tories talking about the scale of welfare savings that they would be looking to try to achieve, if you look at the promises being made about investment in the NHS, well, the flip side of that means that savings come somewhere else from other government department budgets and our local governments. So I think the fiscal challenges are going to be, you know, an environment that we'll have to operate in. So we've got that as an environment, and then alongside that, we've got to build more houses, and we've got to build the right types of houses. We've got, and I'm really interested in some of the things going on here in Wales around aging and housing and health. If NHS get most of the budgets, then are we able to demonstrate what housing's value is to that whole agenda? What's the value? Is it good value to invest in housing as the population ages compared to investment in other things? So I think we've got some demographic challenges, we've got still some huge supply challenges, and we're going to be operating in an environment where there are really big fiscal challenges. And I think that means that at an organization level, obviously organizations will need to think about what services they provide and where they position themselves, but I think some of the work around the futures, some of the learning and development work around futures and frontline staff, we also need to be thinking about how we equip frontline staff to those kind of challenges. But there are opportunities, and just to say, housing, I mean, it's so interesting to me, being in government, in the entire time I was in government, it was only in the last 4 or 5 years that we had that level of interest at the highest levels in government in housing. And I think we won the argument around housing and economic value. Interesting to see whether we're winning the argument on housing and social value. And after the election, I mean, as we know, there's a lot of debate. After the election, housing will still be center stage. So we have a real opportunity to get in there and help influence and develop some of those policies and get access to funding, I hope, as well.
Okay, that's a really positive note to finish on there, Terrie. Thank you. I think we've got about 5 minutes for questions now, if I can see anyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Giving the audience, the CIH members, an opportunity to ask questions, but nothing to do with no difficult questions on policy for the reasons you've said. Any questions? Unrhyw questions yn Cymraeg neu yn Saesneg, in English or Welsh? Put your hand up, please, there's roving mic. Otherwise, I'll pick on Paul Diggory. No, there's one at the back. You're safe, Paul. There's one at the back then.
Hello, my name is Judy Wayne. I work for Altair and have lived and worked in Wales for many, many years. As an Institute member, one of the things I'm interested in is where the Institute thinks it's going in terms of the devolved nations, because some of the message that came through previously was about a consistency of delivery across CIH, which somehow got interpreted into a consistency of policy message, I fear. And therefore, I suppose the question is, very early days yet, but do you have a view as to how best to bring forward to Institute members the things that matter to people in each of the 4 sort of countries? Thank you.
I don't catch all of the question. Sorry, I didn't quite catch the last bit of the question. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Well, about being able, for the Institute to articulate what matters to its members in each of the 4 different countries.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. One of the things that I think that you know that we're doing, and Annie is wandering around and is here in the audience, there she is, is the new kind of overall executive director, but very keen, we're doing a piece of work now looking at the devolved nations and the NBUs and the devolved nations. The thing that has struck me the most, and this is three weeks in, I have to tell you this, But I feel like we've got to somehow make certain that there are different agendas, obviously, in each of the devolved nations, and devolution is on the agenda in England as well. I mean, the reality is that devolution is going to happen, and the CIH needs to be in a position where it can acknowledge that there will be different approaches on certain policies, but also recognize what where we are expert and we understand about what works and what doesn't work. Now, what that might mean, and I think there are some areas of policy that are particularly, there are quite big differences. I mean, welfare is a classic example, right to buy is another classic example. The key thing is that we need to try to make certain that we're learning across the areas about what works and what doesn't work, because any government will make decisions about what it wants to implement, but I think our strength is in being able to advise on the impact of those different policies, and also on advising on what would work better or what doesn't work. And I think anybody in government, and this is one of the things I always found, will say people are really good about sort of criticizing or not knowing what works, but ideas about how things could work better. So I think, I don't think that the kind of concept of one CIH doesn't mean that there's one single message everywhere, because we have to recognize there are differences. But I think we also need to be clear about what our strength is across the profession as well. And I think there are some common strengths that we can be pulling in around some of those issues to do with understanding the impact and implementation of policies.
Any other question before we move on to the next session? I'm not seeing a hand up. No, in which case, I'd like to thank Terrie and for Jules for the interrogation.
Thank you.